on the criminal case against multinational Lafarge and its top managers for crimes committed in Syria. ECCHR, together with partners around the world, uses legal means to hold accountable those that are responsible for the commission of gross human rights violations, and that is both state actors as well as non-state actors, and especially corporations. One case that comprises those two areas, state accountability and the accountability of corporations, is the Lafarge case. In December 2017, 6 French senior directors of Lafarge have been indicted by French judges for financing terrorism and endangering the lives of their local employees. Background of this indictment is that Lafarge is the world's largest multinational corporation producing building materials such as concrete and cement. And they have been operating a factory in northern Syria, and despite the fact that the region was being conflict-ridden and controlled by various armed and terrorist groups like ISIS, they kept running the factory until 2014. They not only exposed their local staff to serious risks, but they also allegedly made payments to groups like ISIS. ECCHR filed together with our Paris-based partner organization Sherpa a criminal complaint on behalf of 11 Syrian former Lafarge employees, and we've been arguing that they have also, by doing business with ISIS, that they have been committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. I'm very glad that we've managed to gather such a great international panel here. We have outstanding experts in their field. That's Marie-Laure Guzlan from Sherpa, it's Mark Taylor from the FAFO Institute, and Mازن Darwish, one of our most important partners in our Syria work. Before I will introduce our guests in more detail, well, first of all, I want to inform you that this panel discussion will be live streamed, and then once questions from the audience are coming, we will turn off the live stream, so that you will not be transmitted to the internet. But also, before I start and give the floor to our guests, I want to explain a little bit ECCHR's position on this case. Because, I think the question arises, why do we believe it's worth gathering such a meeting as we have tonight to discuss a singular criminal investigation in France? We believe that we at European Center for Constitution and Human Rights have been working with our partner organizations, lawyers and activists and torture survivors from Syria for the last 2 years on justice and accountability regarding crimes committed in Syria. We filed 4 criminal complaints regarding crimes against humanity, and in particular regarding torture committed by various intelligence agencies of the Assad regime. We are fully aware that serious crimes are being committed by all parties involved in the conflict, and of course that all those actors should be held to account. And nevertheless, we decided to focus on high-ranking officials of the Assad regime because we believe that the root causes of the Syrian war lay with the decades of crimes being committed by the regime. And without justice for systematic and brutal torture in the various detention sites of the regime, we believe that there's no real hope for a resolution of the conflict. And I guess, as we all are aware, it's not only Syrian actors that are involved and that are fueling the situation, and apart from the fact that there are other states' interests in Syria, it is also multinational corporations that not only profit from the war, but that also become perpetrators of international crimes. And this is why we believe it's important to make clear that the Lafarge case is not just one individual case, criminal case, but is exemplary for how multinational corporations can become part of a war economy. And it shows how companies can end up becoming perpetrators of war crimes or crimes against humanity. So my first few questions go to Marie-Laure from Sherpa. Marie-Laure is the litigation manager of Sherpa, and she has worked on the Lafarge case intensively. She's a lawyer by training, and before joining Sherpa in 2012, she has been working with the Argentinian NGO CELS. So, Marie-Laure, can you first briefly tell us what happened in Syria around the Lafarge factory between 2012 and 2014 that justifies the criminal action that you have been bringing?
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's very important for us also to talk about this case, although it's in the media almost every week, but it's important to talk about it in the perspective of a multinational involved in a conflict. So just a few important dates or years. In 2010, then Lafarge starts to be operating in Syria, in Jalabiyya. And although all the companies leave the country like Total, Bell, Schneider, Lafarge decides to stay. And to stay, they had to find ways to be able to stay and to then find compromises with the different armed groups. So they find someone involved in the regime called Firas, who's going to distribute, let's say, very important amounts of money to the different armed groups to be able to continue. So, as you know, the conflict becomes more and more intense, and especially in this northern region of Syria. And in October 2012, 9 employees are attacked or kidnapped. Then in June 2013, Raqqa, at just 90 kilometers from the factory, is controlled by ISIS. You may know that it's from October 2013 that the European Council sanctions ISIS as really terrorist group. And so in July 2014, the Kurds in the region say to Lafarge, right, you really have to leave now because we can't ensure your security anymore. There've been a bomb attacked just next to the factory, so there's no way we can ensure your security anymore. We don't know really why, but Lafarge still decides to stay. They close for a few days and come back in August. And in September, while all the people around the factory have left to the Turkey border. I don't know if you remember these very striking pictures of thousands of refugees at the Turkey border. So those people from this region have fled to the Turkey border, but Lafarge asks the employees to stay. And on the 19th of September happens what had to happen. ISIS attacks the factory. And 30 people were still in the factory. There was no evacuation plan effective, so they had to flee by themselves, going in vans and motorbikes, and go with all the other refugees to the border. So those facts lead Sherpa to have one first contact, another one, and then we take all those testimonies and we managed to get 200 evidence in the case, and so lots of emails showing the link between not only Lafarge and armed groups, but precisely Lafarge and ISIS. And so maybe it's on your second question, but to be more precise about the facts, they're linked with the infringements that we qualified in the complaint. So maybe I'll deal with that. So why do we attack Lafarge for financing of terrorism? For different reasons. There are different type of sources of terrorism, of financing of terrorism in this case. So the first one is that to be able to keep on operating, they had to pay checkpoint crossing. And we have a very interesting evidence in the complaint where you see the stamps of ISIS in the document that allows Lafarge to go through the checkpoints. So there's one in May 2014, written by hand, and there's one very printed and like showing that it's automatically made every day in September 2014. So they have to pay ISIS so that people and cement could pass through the checkpoints. Then the second source is the purchase of oil and pozzolana to ISIS in the region. And the third one, they let the cement after they left to ISIS. We are looking for a fourth one. If you find it, it's great. I mean, it's a joke, but there's possibly a fourth one when you think that Lafarge must have also sold cement to the different groups. So this is why we attacked for financing of terrorism, but then what are the facts that led us to attack for endangerment? They let the employees suffer at the checkpoints. Sometimes they were attacked in the vehicles, but also they were calling the company saying, look, there's a checkpoint today, we know that this is very difficult to pass, but they were forced to come still in the factory. There were also no evacuation plan, as we told you. So there's lots of negligence measures that were not taken, so that led us to attack Lafarge for endangerment. And also, even, this is something that we did not mention, and some of the CEOs are also indicted for that, for forced labor or work incompatible with dignity. And this is a very important violation for us, because it also would allow the Syrian ex-workers to be compensated. And because they were suffering all the time pressure to come to work, even when it was very dangerous, they were also threatened to lose their salary or to lose their job if they were not coming. And they had to take their salary in very dangerous places in Syria. Sorry for sometimes I'm losing my English. And they were very often kidnapped as well. So all this made us attack the company for also forced labor. And you can see also that all those things can be qualified for lawyers. How many lawyers are in this room, by the way, please? Ah, great. And so, you know that maybe, I don't know, it may be the same in Germany. To attack for complicity, you have to show that there are positive acts of complicity. So to attack for complicity of war crimes or crimes against humanity, we had to show that there were positive acts. So of course the financing is something quite easy to show, but we also had to show that by not taking measures, or by, for example, not taking an evacuation plan, or by asking the employees to take their salary very far away and be exposed to kidnapping, were positive acts of complicity. And then in complicity, you don't have to show, obviously, that Lafarge wanted to commit those crimes against humanity. If not, it would be impossible to attack a company or a person for complicity of war crimes or crimes against humanity. But you have to show the moral element that the company was aware to contribute to crimes against humanity. And if you think about the percentage of financing, 80% of ISIS is financed by natural resources. So how a company like Lafarge could not be aware that the amount of money, because we're not talking about thousands of euros, we are talking now about millions of euros given to all the armed groups, 13 millions in total to those different armed groups. So imagine the amount that it could represent in terms of being able to as ISIS to function really as an organization, and then not only commit the crimes against humanity against the former employees in Syria, but against also people in the world. So yeah, this is why we're tackling.
Thank you. And so you've been in close touch with the witnesses from Syria. So, explain to us, how they experience the situation and why they are, now interested in being witnesses to that case. Because Lafarge was their former employer, but why would they want prosecutions?
We've been very lucky to be able to have 11 former Syrian as civil parties with ECCHR and Sherpa, because at first they were really scared because they still want to have a job in this industry. So, if you attack your ex-company, you're really sticked. And so this is why we ensured to them anonymity, and this is very important, that we would be able to do so and to also communicate with them with encrypted ways. Nowadays, as you may know, as the CEOs have been indicted, they have access to the files, so they have access to the names of the people. But the most important for the former employees is that their identity would be preserved for the industry in general. And Lafarge would not threaten them, although they have received very strange emails saying, if you say this thing or this thing, we could arrange something, but we're not sure it comes from the company. It says it comes from the company, but so now that they see that the case is going very well, they have talked to lots of their friends, and so ECCHR and Sherpa have received more and more contacts. So people would love to be part of the case because they want to be compensated, not only for what they've lost, their house, their job, but also for the moral prejudice that they have suffered. Obviously, they have been pressured, threatened, they have been kidnapped sometimes, they have been really, really scared. One of the refugees that came to France to be auditioned by the judge, Faisal, also explained us that even apart from Daesh and ISIS checkpoints and what he had to suffer every day, he explained us that they had to live in Manbij. Manbij is is a small town next to Jalabia, and they were forced to live there, although ISIS controlled the town. And it seems that it was very hard for them to leave their family, because their family then were like telling them what they have lived during the day, and sometimes just bombing, and the houses were like trembling and shaking, And I mean, I'm not going to enter into details like just what he said about kids being killed and everything, but imagine, I mean, what they have suffered during the war and forced to come to work. Just to let you know that after that, most of them were living in Turkey with the minimum salary, but they were very angry at Lafarge that they did not come to see them or to give them blankets because they were living in refugees camps, or to give them just something to survive better than just the minimum salary. And also, you have to imagine that those people are now refugees in Europe, and they are asking us to do more than what we can, because, for example, one of them is asking us to provide help for the sick children that he has in Greece, and he cannot come to France. And they are asking us, ECCHR and Sherpa, to be civil party to the case. But just to let you know that there's a problem of access to justice in these kind of cases with multinationals involved of international conflicts, because we, small NGOs, have to pay for them, and we are the lawyers, free lawyers for them. But if not, they would not have access to justice. They would have to pay their trip, hotel, and everything. So there's definitely a problem of access to justice in these kind of cases, of international cases. And maybe a last thing is what they have suffered. It's also very important that the journalists and also NGOs would be able to denounce. And this leads me just to the problem of strategic litigation against public participation, when multinationals are attacking us very easily and very often when we denounce such crimes. And we are attacked in Sherpa. I'm attacked personally by Vinci for 100,000 euros. I'm starting to save money, but it's really like a pressure that also the voice that we are for those people receive from the judicial ways called strategic litigation against public participation. So just to put that in the debate, it is very important for those victims of armed conflicts to be able to have those voices. And so this is why we're also working in France to change the law in terms of SLAPs, so that we would still be able to always denounce those kind of violations.
Thank you. And one last question for now. Can you tell us what will be the next procedural steps in the case?
So the case has started quite badly because the prosecutor didn't want to open a preliminary inquiry. So this is thanks to our complaint with civil party that we have had access to instruction judges. And okay, I wanted to talk to you about that, but maybe it's more. It's just to let you know also that in these kind of cases of really with international huge powers, it's very difficult for prosecutors in France to be independent. And we have heard in some cases that they did not want to search in offices because they did not want TV to be denunciating and to be in the office, and they didn't want the values of the actions to get down. And this is crazy to imagine French justice in charge of inquiries telling you, like face to face, that they are not independent, that they are caring about economic powers. So it's very, very like a relief that in this case we are before instruction judges, because the prosecutor wanted to close the case or to have a transaction. So we finally had the case open before 3 great instruction judges, and We had claimants heard. We were heard. In October 2017, we asked the judge to hear the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Fabius, and the ambassadors. So this is also to show you that we start with something. We started with the physical CEOs. We started to attack the French company, but it becomes bigger and bigger. Now the French ministers are involved. So 6 former CEOs were also indicted, and so the next steps would maybe be to involve American justice, or to have definitely the company, but this is going to come, the company indicted, because until now only the physical persons have been indicted. More claimants, and also you have to know that the instruction judge went to the offices in Paris and in Belgium in November, and the lawyers of Lafarge were very putting obstacles to give documents. 6,000 documents were given, but the rest were hidden. Like, for example, the security committee between 2014 and 13 and 14 were not given. Lots of documents were hidden. So what we did is also we made a complaint for hiding the truth. So there's another complaint. So you see, it's becoming complicated. But in January, Lafarge finally sent 267,000 pieces of evidence to the judge. So imagine the amount of work now that the judge has, and they do not have the means that Baker and McKenzie, for example, have. You know that Lafarge, you may know, Lafarge asked an internal inquiry after the complaint from Baker and McKenzie that revealed that 13 million were paid, and so they have huge means, but French justice, paradoxically, does not have such means. So yeah, and next steps would be that, and obviously what we would like is to have the complicity of crimes against humanity studied by the judge. This is very important for us. Do you have 3 more minutes? We are very happy that French justice have been efficient in this, but this is also because it was about counterterrorism. And of course, when it's about ISIS, there are lots of means put, but for once, counterterrorism is not impeding human rights to be respected, because as you know, in Germany, France, there are lots of fundamental rights that are infringed because of counterterrorism. But thanks to this counterterrorism, the judges are all studying the other legal bases, forced labor, and we hope now crimes against humanity, because it would be, for millions of victims of conflicts, a sign that definitely, if judges can recognize that economic actors can be involved in financing of terrorism, they can also be involved in conflicts in general and huge violations of human rights. I may talk to you then about the French law that would impede that, but
Good, thank you for this introduction and for explaining more details of the case. I now want to turn to Mark. Mark Taylor is a senior researcher at the Norwegian FAFO Institute, and he has written his doctoral thesis on war economies and international law. So he's been working on the topic of corporate accountability for international crimes for more than a decade. So, Mark, given your expertise, as a researcher into war economies in general and the role of business actors, but also in Syria in particular. Explain to us, how do war economies develop, and let us know some things you know about the Syrian war economy.
So I will say thank you, Miriam, and thank you for the invitation. I'll try not to recite my entire doctoral thesis, but I think it's interesting, given what Marie-Laure has said, to take a step back and to consider some of the patterns that we see historically over time. And those patterns are pretty clear, both with respect to war economies, economic activity connected to armed conflict, as well as to the ways that the law regulates those economies. And I just want to say three things to start off. One is that economic activity has always been a part of war. Now, for the Syrians in the room, for anybody who's ever lived in a war zone, that's a really obvious statement. But for the lawyers in the room, in particular the international lawyers in the room, that's not so obvious. So it's really important to make that statement. How does economic activity connect to war? It connects through survival, the kinds of things that Marie-Laure was describing. People need jobs. They need to survive in war zones. But it also survives because the organizations that are fighting the war need the means to fight the war. They need soldiers or fighters, they need weapons for them to use, and they need money to get both of those and to sustain those over time. And those three elements are the basic elements of any war economy. And they can be a very formal war economy, and we can call it the defense industry, or it can be a very informal war economy, the kind we see in war zones. And, for example, that we would see in a case like Syria. So you mentioned a couple of things, such as the purchasing of oil, the alleged purchasing of oil by Lafarge from IS. The sort of oil industry became a very big and important target for the U.S. coalition and for the Russians at a certain point. But who were they selling the oil to? They took control of the oil fields, but who were they selling to? I'd be happy to have some answers from the audience. I have a few, I think, but I'd be happy to hear from the audience who they think. We've heard about antiquities being sold abroad. And of course, the entire economy around the movement and coercion of people, whether it's kidnapping or trafficking. And of course, the regional arms trade and different forms of financing outside of those informal things like kidnapping, antiquities, and oil. And that kind of war economy is extremely typical. We see it in every conflict zone for the last, certainly the last 50 years. Similar patterns being played out in parts of Latin America, parts of Africa, and other parts of Asia. Just a couple of words on how the law has been responding to this, because the law has attempted to deal with this, international law and national law, really for as long as this has been going on. I mean, literally for 2,000 years, and I won't bore you with the history. But in the last 25 years, we've seen an evolution of international law towards trying to grapple with some of these things. And that's happened in a couple of ways. It's happened through the increased use of sanctions, in particular bilateral sanctions by particular states, not least the United States. And in fact, the attempt by the United States to go after the IS economy from 2014 and subsequently was probably the most coordinated international attempt to go after a war economy of an opponent since the Second World War. It was an extremely mobilized military means, of course, as you know, to attack oil targets, but it also mobilized diplomatic means in a way we hadn't seen before. But we also see the increasing use of international criminal law, which is really one of the key issues here. Since the Second World War, and the Nuremberg tribunals and the subsequent tribunals, but also in the tribunals since then, to do with the former Yugoslavia, Sierra Leone, Rwanda, and at the ICC. And crimes like pillage, in other words, theft in war, and also forced labor, have been prosecuted in all of those cases. And some of them, in particular, in the post-war tribunals, dealt with economic actors. So the best way to think about this is that, look, there's a war economy, and it can be formal in some ways, and it can be informal in some ways. So it can be a sort of straight-ahead defense industry. It can be the German government and the U.S. government giving military and financial means to their allies in the war in Syria, both covertly and overtly. And it can be informally. It can be those same organizations getting their weapons or their money through informal means of the kinds I've described on the black market in terms of guns and in terms of selling things like oil or antiquities or other forms.
Thank you. You've just been describing the ways business actors can be involved in the war zone and in war economies. Still, the image, especially of multinational corporations, is usually that one of smart global players and not really war profiteers. And you can also see, multinational companies have complicated structures, complicated decision-making processes. And so that's also what you could see in the Lafarge case. Once the internal investigation has been out, there started the finger pointing of, the CEO pointing to his, to others, and his subordinates, pointing to him. And the question is, how much can blame be shifted and be shielded behind corporate structures? So, when do you think? Is it really easy to diffuse responsibility in those situations? Or when do you think is the line being crossed from just doing business in a difficult situation to becoming not only even a profiteer, but becoming an actor in crimes committed in the war zone?
I think it's really important one of the assumptions that I made in talking about this, and talking about war economies and not talking about, for example, business in conflict, is purposely to try to make a little clearer that there are these economic activities that are taking place. And to the extent that a business is participating in them, they can connect themselves to actors who are committing atrocities. And so this is clearly the general pattern that is being described by Milor in the Lafarge case, where you have a company which is established before the world around it goes to hell. And they have a decision to make. Do they stay or do they go? How do they stay if they stay? And if they do stay, what are the transactions? What are the business and what are the economic activities and business transactions that they are conducting, and who are they doing that business with? And these are the decisions. These are the questions that will decide the liability risk for a corporation. So I think it's very important from the start to think about activities and not necessarily about actors. We tend to see, as you suggested in your question, we tend to see multinational corporations as either the embodiment of evil, if you're an anti-globalist and so on, or as the embodiment of all that is good. Corporations do require people to make decisions, and they do require people to actually do things. And most jurisdictions around the world in some way relate to that relationship between individual officers of the company or the corporation and the responsibility of the corporation. And most jurisdictions have theories for either attaching liability and responsibility on the part of the company through the acts of an individual, or separating that liability. We see this in anti-corruption law, for example, in the United States, where the whole culture of compliance and due diligence with respect to not paying bribes, for example, can be used by a corporation to basically say, okay, she's the bad apple. We had all of our systems in place, we did everything correct, but somebody still nonetheless paid a bribe. And so and that's a defense that I think needs to be available to a company, because actually we need the companies to be making sure that they're not that they're doing the right thing, that they're not crossing that line, and you need to do that in a systematic way. But it can't be at the same time the basis for us to say, well, you know, our large multinationals are all fine and good. We see consistently in these conflict zones companies that are, in one way or another, I think you said, Marie-Laure, you know, in one way or another, decide to stay too long. Lafarge is not the first company to be charged with financing terror. Chiquita faced similar charges in connection with its activities in Colombia, paying protection payments payments to armed groups that were listed as terrorist organizations in the United States. And they argued they had to do it for the safety of their staff. The United States Department of Justice said you were financing a terrorist organization. And they were found guilty of that, and they made a plea bargain. This is not the first case. And I should say that if you look back over the last 10, 15 years, yes, I haven't been doing this for too long, but if you'd asked me 10, 12 years ago, I would have said that the cases were very rare. I think it's fair to say today that there is a steady trickle of cases. There's by no means a flood, but these cases are not going away. If anything, they're coming more and more often.
Thank you. I will now turn to Mázin. Mázin Drouish is a Syrian human rights activist, journalist, and the president of the Syrian Center for Media and Freedom of Expression. And following the peaceful mass protests against President Assad in spring 2011, the SCM began documenting the names of activists who had been imprisoned, disappeared, or killed. In 2012, he was named Journalist of the Year by Reporters Without Borders, and Drouish himself has been imprisoned several times on account of his work. And he's one of the complainants in the criminal proceedings ongoing before the General Prosecutor's War Crimes Unit here in Germany. So Mázin, you know, while the international community has been condemning the gross human rights crimes committed by various actors involved in the conflict, all attempts so far have failed to hold them to account. Why do you and your organization work, nevertheless, towards legal accountability for international crimes committed in Syria? And what, in your opinion, can legal justice achieve in such a difficult situation?
Thank you very much. And thank you for all of you for your time and coming. Why justice is important and it can achieve? Marie-Laure give 3 reasons to sue Lafarge. For us, maybe I can give 30 reasons why it's important, the justice in Syria. And why this work is very important. I think this is not about revenge, or I'm not talking as a victim, but as a Syrian citizen who looking for the future and want my children to live in safe environment, a normal environment. So after all what happened in Syria, I don't think we can be able to achieve peace without accountability and without justice. This is a very important point. It's not about revenge, it's not luxury. There is no way to build sustainable peace in Syria without accountability. And if we are really looking for reconciliation of the society in general after all what happened, this means also we need to know the truth. What happened, why happened, how. We need to guarantee that this will not be back again and again happening, because this has happened in 1982. And there is also thousands of civilians, in Hama example, killed by the authority, the same regime, but nothing happened. So again, after a few years, it's be able to done again, because nothing happened for the first time massacre in Hama example. there is no way also to defeat ISIS or the extremism organization now in Syria without justice. The international community tried in Iraq, I think in 2006, they tried just to bombing Al-Qaeda, killing the leader, and celebrating and feeding Al-Qaeda. But without justice, without accountability, without serious change and democratic. And when we awarded those leaders who commit war crime like Al-Malki, by example, in Iraq, after a few years, we create ISIS. It's not coming from the Mars. This is a result for the way how we will deal with Al-Qaeda, how we will deal all of these crimes happened also in Iraq. The leak of justice. The youth, when they feel that there is no justice, no accountability, and there is no legal way to achieve their rights. So just we push them to extremism. We told them, we can't do any things for you, go and become members of Al-Qaeda or ISIS. I don't want this to my children, I don't want for my brothers. We need to give them another example. We need to tell them, start with the law, with the hope of justice. Keep commitment to the human right issue and value. Don't go to extremism. And this is also very important, not only for us as a Syrian, even for the safety of each one of you. Syria is not the neighbor of EU or the European country. It's in the middle, in the capital. We can separate what happened in Syria and say this is not our problem. No, all of us now involved for what happened in Syria and the Middle East in general. And this is, as I said, very important for safety of my children in Syria, but also for each one of us in any place in Europe or in the world. Why also? Because I want to go back to my country. I'm very happy and really very thankful for allowing me to come into Germany and to have this peace environment to work and to learn and a lot of things. But this is not my choice. I'm forced to leave my country. I want to go back. My family is still there, my house, my dreams, everything. And German language is very difficult. To be honest also. How we can, as a refugee who's suffering from torture, our lover killing in the prisons, all of you know about Caesar photo and a lot of what happened in Syria. How anyone imagine that we will go back to Syria if there is no guarantee that those who made this war crime will be accountable? Minimum to not be in the authority, to not allow them to arrested and tortured and killed again and again and again. And if you have too much time and continue to give reason, but minimum for these three things, for peace, we need accountability to defeat extremism and to allow us to go back to our country.
Thank you. This all makes very much sense, what you've been saying, the importance of justice and accountability. At the first place, when you think about political and military actors, but is it really that important to look at the economic actors, especially the international ones, or is that just an unfortunate accident that happened?
After Marie-Laure said that they charge her 150,000 euro, I'm not sure that I want to talk too much about this. But, yeah, and I agree with Mark that this is very stereotype of war economic in general, but in Syria also it's not the same. It's not only the regular situation in the country in a war. In Syria, as everything, it's more complicated. Because company and businessmen, they are connected directly to war crime. Even not only financially. Can give some example. By example, Rami Makhlouf, one of the biggest businessmen in Syria, and I've owned maybe half of Syria. We are not talking about a businessman working in the war zone and need to find solution or balance to keep continuing his working. We are talking about businessmen involved directly in the war. I can give one of the example that I am witness in it, that he have Al-Bustan NGO, charity to give support to the poor men. In early March 2011, they enforced the employee in this charity, and even the poor men they took a salary from them and give them weapons and stick and ask them to go and attack the civilian protester. This is since March 2011. This is not only about business and how you can survive in war. Can give also another example, Mohammed Hamsho. He's also one of the very important businessmen. One of his activity that he have TV channel, Sama or Dunya at that time channel, only because he's under sanction, so he changed the name and everything go with it. This is a type of sanction we have it for the Syrian businessmen, only change the name and nothing like that. This TV, it's really can be an example like what happened in Rwanda. It's not only about fake news and propaganda, supporting the regime, but also pushing for violence and hate speech, and make those who's asking and still talking about March and April. There is nothing, any military, any terrorism in Syria, only those youth and civilian protesters. Some of the businessmen like Riyad Sharish and Hamid Jaber, they enforce their employee to go and become member in the National Guard or Difaa al-Watani, National Security. It's like Shabiha. They enforce them. If you want to take your salary and increase your salary, you should go and become fighter, or there is no job for you. So in Syria, we are not talking about the regular, we are talking about some kind of partnership between those businessmen and company and the security service and the war crime. They are totally involved in general. And there is also a very important point, because now only we are talking about reconstruction in Syria. These last 4 days, more than, until the early morning, there is 375 civilian, 150 child in Al-Ghouta killed by the air attack from the regime. And now all the talk, it's about rebuilding and reconstruction the country. So whatever what now, and let us hope that this war will stop. What's the meaning of the reconstruction? By example, Daraya, the suburb of Damascus in general, is controlled now from Hezbollah and the Shi'i forest in Shabiha. There is 60 or maybe 70 name of armed group. I would be very happy if this company or the reconstruction will rebuild Daria, by example. But we should be very careful. Daria, there is no one of the people of Daria live in Daria now. All of them in forests to leave their houses. Who will come and live in this building? Company and reconstruction, it could be also part from the war crime. This is very serious and very important issue. For all of these reasons, we need really to be sure that those company or businessmen who made and partner in war crime will not benefit from the reconstruction and rebuilding. We don't want to award them in a huge contract and huge money again. And this is what also happened in Iraq. The reconstruction money, hundreds of billions of dollars, going to those armed lord of war, and now they have each one of them army. Badr and Fatimiyun and they come and a private army, each group of those people, because they benefit from the reconstruction money. Again, this is only a sample. I know it's very late. I don't want you to stay for tomorrow. I'm just giving example and reason.
Thank you. Yes, for giving us also a perspective from Syria and also showing, as you described, the Syrian businessmen, that they are obviously the potential business partner for international corporations, which they then also need to think about whom they want to have transactions with, also for future deals. I think now I have one last question for the podium, and then I will open the floor for questions. And that is sort of, this case has been, does this case have the potential to be a game changer because it highlights the involvement of corporate actors, multinational actors in the Syrian war? Or is this case only flying before the French prosecutors because it is going under this anti-terrorism laws, which, are on one hand, at least from our ECCHR's perspective, problematic, because they are just very wide and they easily flow, and it's all just in this hysteria of anti-terrorism in France. So anyone who's got an opinion about this?